Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at BMW's brand new 2 Series Gran Coupe. Back in 2012, BMW released their first Gran Coupe, which was the 6 Series. 2 years later, they released the 4 Series Gran Coupe. And then last year, they released their flagship 8 Series Gran Coupe. What is a Gran Coupe, or what is this one more specifically? Well, it's fundamentally a 1 Series underneath. It's the same engine lineup, it's the same gearbox, it's basically the same car, but with a different shell on it. I guess for some people it's a prettier shell, it's a more sporty shell. It's effectively a coupe with 2 extra doors on the back. And in fact, this one has a really big boot. It's about, off memory, 50 litres bigger than the 1 Series hatchback, which is quite impressive. And when you look at the boot, it's got quite a deep floor, it's got quite a deep space, so you can store quite a lot of stuff in there, and there's a nice underfloor storage as well. Where it does fall a bit short though is rear cabin space because of the sloping roofline. So think of it as more of a form over function car in terms of interior practicality, even though this car has got the front wheel drive architecture, so the engine effectively sits a lot further forward than in the previous 1 Series, for instance, and that frees up a lot more space in the cabin, but the rear of the cabin is really tight. And in fact, I'm going to go and demonstrate that now sitting behind my driver's seat. Let me just remind you that I am 6'4", so you could call me a giant, and this is only a 2 Series. I've got my driver's seat in my position. As we open the door, what strikes me first is actually how small the door opening is. There's really not much space to get in. So that's a lot smaller than the 1 Series hatchback. And when I go to get in, well, it actually looks quite challenging, if I'm being honest. And yeah, it's a lot tighter in here than it is in the 1 Series hatchback. I've got a lot less headroom for one, which you would expect because of the sloping roofline, but I've also got less legroom. I think they quote that it has a tiny bit less than the 1 Series, but realistically it is a fair amount tighter in here, and that's before you start looking at the small windows, and it just feels a bit more claustrophobic back here. I'd personally have a roof if you're going to have kids or if you're going to have passengers in the back quite regularly, but definitely look or go and try out the 1 Series and the 2 Series in your local showroom before you get one of these, because in my head anyway, the 1 Series is a lot bigger in the back. Why have BMW done this? Well, a lot of the German manufacturers at least are finding segments and niche cars in every area of the market at the moment. And so I think when BMW had seen Mercedes release the CLA a few years ago, that's had quite success, that car. And I think what they found was that customers that wanted something small and compact but not a hatchback were having to jump away from the BMW brand and into something like the Mercedes CLA. Also, we've got a trend of downsizing. So people that are in their 5 Series are now downsizing to their 3 Series. People that are in the 3 Series are downsizing to a 2 Series, but up until now, the 2 Series has only been available as a 2-door coupe. So now they've actually got the option of downsizing to a 2 Series that's fairly practical. I think what we'll do now is have a quick walk around the car before we take it out for a drive. Some of you might have noticed that this is actually the flagship M235i, so fundamentally the same as an M135i. It has the 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, which is actually BMW's most powerful 2-litre to date. 306 horsepower, 450 newton meters of torque. It has a claimed 0 to 62 figure of 4.9 seconds. And this particular engine is actually hand finished in the UK engine plant, which I think is pretty cool for UK customers especially. The design language from cars like the flagship 8 Series is now trickling down to the 1 and 2 Series, like the car we have in front of us. So you've got the new one-piece grille. We've got, on this particular 2 Series Gran Coupe, we have got pillarless windows, which is pretty cool on a car of this size. This being the M235i, there's a couple of telltale signs for those of you enthusiasts. Obviously we've got this new style grille, which I'm not the biggest fan of, to be fair. I would prefer more of a traditional looking grille. We've got the serum grey canards down there. Got the Serum wing mirrors. These are like harping back to obviously the original M135i back in 2012. This particular car has also got Serum coloured 18-inch alloy wheels, and behind them are hiding some really big M Performance brakes, which are standard on this flagship M235i. When you walk around the back of the car, I'm not sure how I feel about the way this car looks. I think when I first saw early press shots of it, I thought it was actually quite ugly. But in real life, from certain angles and in certain colours, there was actually a black one back at base that looked really good. And I think some angles do it bigger favours than others. And it makes more sense in real life, that's for sure. When you're around the back, it is quite a high boot, and it does remind me a little bit of an X4. But I do like the way they've kind of lined up everything. It's all sort of nice horizontal lines across there. And it kind of does work when you get down low. Cool, I guess the next thing to do is take this car out for a drive and see what it's like compared to the M135i. Okay guys, we are now on the move. I've actually got Mr. Steph ABTV next to me.
Mate, I haven't seen you in ages.
I know, it's been at least about 48 hours.
If that, yeah.
We both travelled down here today because we live quite close to each other, and we're sharing a car because that's what happens on these launches.
Yeah.
We never have much time with these cars. Like, let me tell you, firstly, Steph's obviously shooting his own version of this car today, so make sure you check that out on his channel. Yeah. But yeah, literally, we probably got an hour each with this particular car, so it's always quite a rushed affair. Before we start talking about the car, I just want to correct myself, because we've actually just discovered that the wheels on the outside, they're actually 19s.
Yeah, they look much smaller though.
They do look small.
Like generally I thought they were 18s.
I think that's why some of the early press shots looked a bit odd, because this car with 17-inch alloys, their wheels would look really, really small, because I think the back end's really quite large, isn't it?
It is,
and it needs, well, it needs the 19s to fill the arches. The downside with having 19s, just like with the M135i, and I think BMW are going to change this, but you can't opt for adaptive suspension if you go for the 19s or the M Sport Plus pack that this car's got. So it's a bit of a compromise. And in fact, I've never driven a 135i or an M135i with the Plus pack. I've only driven the one that I had and a one on the press launch. They both had adaptive suspension, so this is gonna feel different. Before we talk about how this car feels dynamically, what I am going to talk about is the models that are available at time of launch here in the UK. So there's three engine choices effectively. There's the 218i, which is a 1.5 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine, 140 horsepower. There's then the 220d, which has got a diesel engine in it, and that produces about 190 brake horsepower, and that is going to be the most efficient, probably the best seller, but I don't know, it'd be between that and the 218i. Then there is this car, which is the flagship M235i, which we've talked about on the outside, 2 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged, 306 horsepower, and pretty rapid, as I know from the M135i. The trims available on both of the 218i and the 220i are the Sport trim, which is the base or the entry level for the UK, and then the M Sport trim. And the Sport trim comes with quite a few standard options, things like 17-inch wheels we've already talked about, which I think are going to look quite small, LED lights, cruise control, 2-zone climate control, parking sensors front and rear, so a host of standard equipment on their base trim level car. Then you go up to the M Sport level and you've got 18-inch wheels, you've got Dakota leather heated seats, you've got folding door mirrors, you've got things like the digital cockpit with the 10.25-inch center display. So you get, again, they're a very quick and hard to point out that that sort of standard equipment on that trim and that price point is very aggressive compared to say the Mercedes CLA. Then you get this range up of the M235i, and this comes with a number of other standard options that you need to check out the configurator on really, but we can say like the unique 18-inch wheels are standard in serum grey. Then you've got things like the M Sport braking system. You actually get Alcantara off memory as standard on the interior, but obviously, and everything else that carries over from the M Sport trim. Now, let's talk about what it's like to drive. Well, I'm going to knock it into sports. Not that that's going to make too much of a difference because we don't have adaptive suspension, but it's going to give me a sharper throttle response. I'm going to knock it back into manual. I've got the lovely digital display in front of me. It is the smaller cockpit compared to the 5, the 7, the 8 series, but still it's fundamentally the same thing. And it needs to be smaller because the wheel's a little bit smaller, everything's a little bit smaller. I've got a lovely head-up display, which is a really cool thing to have in a car of this size and segment. You know, it's really, really impressive. Right, let's give it some. Well, surprise, surprise, it feels very much like the M135i and the Mini Clubman JCW.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds pretty much identical. The exhaust note might be a tiny bit different, but that's just because of the layout of it, slightly different. But I have to say that the ride is definitely more busy on these 19s without adaptive. So yeah, it's a difficult one because, as Steph was saying, you kind of need to go for the 19s for aesthetics, especially on this, more so than on the 1 Series. But the ride is busy. Like, this thing is, it feels quite busy, doesn't it? Not overly stiff, and definitely not like M2 competition stiff, but it's definitely not as comfortable as that M135i I had, especially when you put that one with adaptive into comfort. It became very pliant and very comfortable. It was a lovely daily to live with that car. One thing is for sure is how nice this interior is. We've got all the tech that you can imagine, everything in fact pretty much that you can get on the higher models like the 5 and 7 and the 8 series, and there's lots of lovely little touches in here, like the touchscreen sat nav, the operating system 7, the way it's angled at the driver at about 7 degrees, which means that as I reach over to it, my finger is at the same distance to the nav screen no matter where I am on the nav screen, if that makes sense. So really clever little things like that, and it just makes the driver feel like they're in a bit of a driver-centric cockpit, which does hark back to old school BMWs. Right, before we finish this video, I'm just going to give it a bit of a spirited drive on this national speed limit road, just to see what it feels like when you start pushing it a little bit on the road. Obviously we're on a public road, so we can only do so much, but the grip is amazing. You know, this X-Drive system, although it's fundamentally a front wheel drive system in this car that's hooked up to the rear wheels, so it sends most of the power to the front all the time. It's not like an M5's trick X-Drive system, but it still gets the power down very efficiently. And as I found out with the M135i, it really does cover ground exceptionally fast, and it's in line with pretty much, you know, all other, well, I was going to say hot hatches, but this isn't a hot hatch, but in line with the CLA, say 35, or you know, the all-wheel drive platform. Yeah, it's definitely busy. It's definitely busy.
You can probably feel it as well, can't you?
Yeah, you can, but like you say, the roads are pretty bad around here. But yeah, it's interesting. Am I having as much fun in this as I would be in my M2 competition? Of course I'm not. No way in a million years. But it's not, you know, it's not trying to be a full-on M car. It's not claiming to be the ultimate driver's car. It's just a very complete and impressive package. And I have to say, just like the 135i, the front end feels really good. It's the on the brakes, and then that turn in feels really, really good. And that's where the biggest improvement is over, say, the previous 1 Series platform and your normal 2 Series coupe. It feels really good. Right, I'm going to end this video now because Steph needs to shoot his. But I will hopefully get my hands on one of these down the track for a bit of a longer period of time, so I can do a more extensive video and sort of living with living with the car type video. But yeah, would I have one? Probably not. If I was getting a car like this, I would personally go for the M135i hatchback. It's about £800 cheaper spec for spec, but not just because of the price, because I actually really like hatchbacks. Do I get why BMW are building this? Yes, I do, because there are people out there that don't particularly like hatchbacks, and it is, you know, it's a different alternative, and also it just stops them losing customers to the likes of Mercedes, so it makes sense. The colour of this car, by the way, is Snapper Rocks Blue, which is a new colour for this particular segment. Yeah, we weren't sure sort of what that sounds like.
Yeah.
It's kind of somewhere between a sweet and a drug.
Yeah, yeah, or a mix of both.
Yeah, so guys, until the next time, I'll see you then. Remember to check out Steph's video, and yeah, I'll see you at the next video. Cheers. Sync clap, M235i in car.